was like you'd lit the firecracker and you were just getting to sit back and watch the excitement in the room, because years and generations of working hard like that is finally really paying off for the producers.
It was a record-breaking week in the Rockies sale that delivered some big numbers, but what does it all mean for us heading into the second half of the year? Today, Superior Livestock Clint Berry is back with us as we unpack the results from that sale. We're going to cover everything from market fundamentals and program calf sales to weaning decisions and delivery time.
A rising tide floats all boats. When it's a seller's market more than a buyer's market, the margin between best, better, and good narrows.
We'll also hit on the heifer prices, signs of retention, and what Clint calls the best buy in the cattle market right now. So as ranchers, what can we take away from the week in the Rockies sale? Find out on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone, and we welcome you. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show, and I'm Justin Mills. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on the program here today. As you heard there in the opening, Mr. Clint Berry with Superior Livestock is back with us. We're going to be rehashing coming out of the week in the Rockies sale that Superior Livestock held in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and just the tone of the market in general. Really not going to get, and giving you fair warning here, really not going to be able to get deep into the details of specific prices on specific weight and types of calves, just because that's really hard to do. However, we're going to talk about where you can find that information and just generally what was making the prices where they were at. And I think will enjoy today's program. Now, if you do miss it and you want to go back and listen to it again, you can go to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com, or you can also find it on any podcast provider out there as well if you just search Working Ranch Radio Show. Now, speaking of shows, did you listen to last week's show? It was episode 220 with Dallas Mount with Ranch Management Consultants. We were talking about making the most out of your profit. Yeah, no doubt there's probably a lot of profit in the industry this year, but that doesn't necessarily qualify you as a successful rancher. But if how you choose to handle that, there might be ways that can set yourself up for the future. As we know, markets do what markets do. They're going to be up, they're going to be down. There's going to be that middle ground in between those spots. And how do we continue to be a profitable ranching operation, moving both in and out and through that types of marketplaces that we see? So I think you'll find last week's show with Dallas Mount very, very informative. Again, that is episode 220. Hey, the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine is out. It is the summer issue of Working Ranch Magazine. It's been out for a little bit now. In fact, they're working on already the next issue. But if you don't have a subscription and you want to catch the next one that's going to be coming out, you can go to workingranchmag.com and you can start your subscription here today. Or a really very simple way to do it is stop by your local Tractor Supply store, and you can pick one right up off the shelf. And a shout out here today to the Tractor Supply store in Clifton Park, New York, in Soddy Daisy, Tennessee, in Ronks, Pennsylvania, and in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Well, as we turn towards our subject here today, joining us, as I said at the top of the program, is Mr. Clint Berry with Superior Livestock. He is out of St. Angelo, Texas. He's been a Superior rep for many, many years, cattle feeder, rancher, a lot of different things, jack of all trades. Clint, good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Good to be here, Justin. Thank you, sir. Good to get to visit again.
Well, as we started this morning, the first comment we just sort of talked about was, man, oh man, what a sale. That week of the Rockies sale for Superior Livestock, recapping that this week and coming away from that, boy, it's definitely something this market has never seen.
Yeah, that's very true, Justin. If you got to take a little time on the 4th and enjoy the fireworks, they ran all week long after the 4th in week in the Rockies up at Steamboat on the mountain. From we sold cattle, it was like you'd lit the firecracker and you were just getting to sit back and watch the excitement in the room, because years and generations of working hard like that is finally really paying off for the producers. And it was just exciting to see that market just absolutely take off and come to life. We had the greatest sale we'd ever had back in June at the Corn Belt Classic, and just been working forward. We launched off that week and we're hitting record prices, and then they closed the border down, and it was like you put a spur on it. It just took off that much further. But it was a great week to be there, an extreme amount of optimism, both from sellers and buyers. And it's always nice when when the industry is injected with that kind of optimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to be totally like have a question here thrown out to you that we all know kind of the answer to, sure. But let's kind of walk through maybe some of the fundamentals. As we know, I mean, again, we know where the numbers are low, so just simple supply and demand numbers. But fundamentally, just let's talk fundamentals first of all before we start getting into and rehashing some of this that's continuing to support this. And there was one news thing that happened last week that was supportive as well. But just fundamentally, what's helping this market?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. Let's not forget the basics. Timing, was like the side dish on it or the seasoning in it when you're making something, but I mean, the reality is we're at the lowest. We're going to have the lowest cow numbers in, arguably 7 decades. That's driving the boat. But the other side, we can never forget this. We're in the greatest demand for our product in the history of our industry. We are consuming, maybe not per capita, we are consuming more beef and we are exporting more beef to other markets more than what we've ever done before. And I think that, those two combinations right there together is what makes this market just so explosive and so satisfying for producers.
Mm-hmm. When we start talking export market, I think, was there any concern as you headed into this sale? We've brought it up here on the program a little bit about the Mexican screwworm, and the border was set to reopen, but then it quickly shut down. How did that have an effect in everything?
Going into it, the border coming back open, there was no impression that you could see that was a concern. And now when we shut the border down during the week while we were up there, when they announced that closure again, that certainly spiked it and helped, launch those record highs again, just because we knew there'd be less cattle here. But let's be fair. I think the reason that it's an impact, but as long as it stays science-based, that's what's important. Mm-hmm. You don't want those kind of decisions being made over political agendas by any means, regardless of which side of the aisle a person falls on. But, it's vitally important for us to keep the New World screwworm out of our herds and to do everything possible to do that. We fought this demon before in generations past, and we know how to fight it. And luckily, the administrations and Secretary Rollins and the work that they're doing now to re-energize that program to release sterile flies and fight that in Mexico and Central America, that's going to help us here. There's a likelihood that we could have to fight that within our own borders. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's this reality of animal disease, and we're just going to take all hands on deck to fight that. But the nice thing is there's a new energy and a new focus and a cooperation from Mexico with our government to fight that animal too. It's currently a little less than 400 miles from the southern border, and we'd sure like to halt it there by all means. But there's going to be some factors that are going to play into that, and that if it comes to our border, and there's a chance that I would certainly expect some live cattle exports to be shut down. Mm-hmm. But there could be some, and maybe it is a little political when it comes to some of it, but there could be some shutdowns for exports. So it's one of them critical things that we have to keep an eye on, and it's probably the most pressing issue in the beef industry as we currently sit right here. So I feel like that's something we need to keep our heads on straight and remember to be science-based when we come about it. It's not like we don't have a solution for the problem. We just have to fight it and be science-based on importing and exporting and just overall animal health.
Yeah. All right, Clint, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk now about what did the buyers pay for and what didn't they pay for as we rehash the results coming out of the week in the Rockies sale. We'll get into that when we come back after the break. This segment today brought to you by Mansaver Post Driver by Roar Manufacturing. When it comes to building fence, driving those steel posts can be exhausting and absolutely backbreaking. But there is another way you could be doing this. Now, I'm not talking about those bulky and expensive gas-powered or hydraulic pounders. What I'm talking about is the Mansaver Post Driver. Yeah, it's called the Mansaver Post Driver by Roar Manufacturing. This is a portable, lightweight, easy-to-use post driver that runs off of any small air compressor and is 100% made in the USA. The Mansaver Post Driver Driver comes in a variety of models, from driving posts ranging from vineyard stakes to T-posts and all the way up to 3.5-inch diameter posts. While it may be called the Man Saver Post Driver, shoot, I've heard some go as far as calling it the Marriage Saver Post Driver. But take a look for yourself. See it in action when you go to their website at rohrmfg.com. That's ROHRERMFG.com. Or if you want to talk to a real person, give them a call at 800-980-7599. The Man Saver Post Driver, the portable, lightweight, and easy-to-use pneumatic post driver where the name speaks for itself. All right, Clint, I want to get into now the question that I had written down as I was preparing for our conversation here today is, what did the buyers pay for and what didn't they pay for? And I think that gets us, we can go from there and talk a lot of different things. But, you know, when I say that question, is there just a general thought that comes, or do we need to narrow that down into specific things?
Probably all of the above. I mean, there is a general principle. And I think the vast majority of people that, involved in marketing livestock would agree with me on this. There is a trend that happens when the markets go up and when they come down. In general, a rising tide floats all boats. So in general, when the market is getting higher, on behalf of the producers, when it's getting higher, when it's a seller's market more than a buyer's market, the margin between, I'm just going to say, best, better, and good narrows. Mm-hmm. And that would encompass most any category you want to talk about. That would encompass better quality. That would encompass better management. That would encompass third-party program verification for, opportunities to add premiums. The margins are still there. There's still a benefit for better cattle. There's still a benefit for more, I'm going to say, more profitable delivery windows. There's more value in weaning. There's more value in third-party programs, but you don't see as wide a margin from the better cattle to the average cattle, whether that's in management, programs, or genetics. You don't see as wide a margin as you do when the market is a buyer's market. And that makes sense, right? That's simple economic 101. When the buyer has more control, they can differentiate for the product they want more. And so you will find trend lines that follow that almost 100% of the time. There are, examples where it's a little different. It might make you scratch your head and wonder why this or that. But in general, if you understand that concept, it makes a lot of sense because, like I said, who has the leverage in the negotiation, the buyer or the seller? And so that policy sticks true. And I don't think that's any different for any product, regardless of, we're talking about beef, but that's not any product is that way.
Yeah. So as you come out of that, and I know that you're still, a lot of the data is still being deciphered out and you're kind of rolling through it. I know I have been kind of going through it and looking at, okay, this set of calves sold for this, and then there was this set of calves sold for, a couple cents higher, and they had this or they didn't have that, and all those kinds of things. But as you, just your first blush coming out of that, how did our program cattle do? And when I say that, I realize that that's a vast variety of cattle, but I'm going to narrow that up a bit and say,
sure,
like our NHTC and our GAP type stuff. How did they sell over your other cattle? Was there the premium in that they hoped to get in there, or what was your feeling coming out of that?
Well, a seller always wants a bigger premium than what they get. When you said hope to get, that's an easy answer. But yes, the premiums are still there for the program cattle, but they're not as wide a margin as if we'd have looked at numbers from a year or 2 years or 3 years ago, because the sellers have more control due to the limited supply than the buyers do. They have more leverage in that negotiation, but there's still a premium for those program cattle. Now, I do that with an asterisk, because what does that mean for your operation? So if, one of the big questions we have right now, and yes, it varies, and no, I don't have all the data, but, maybe just as a round number, let's say $10 a hundredweight, well, you've got to figure out in your program if that's paying you to make that decision and move forward with that or not, because the program cattle are still going to set the pace and be the highest selling cattle, regardless. It's just, there were times, I know over the years we've talked, and there's times that I can tell you that it's $15, $20, $25, $30 variances due to an impact like that. And that probably does not exist right now in most cases. But I will tell your listeners the same thing I told one of my customers when we were talking here a couple of weeks ago, and he was asking me about, could I go ahead and verify these cattle into the program, cattle that are in the pasture right now on the side of their mothers that we're going to ship in September. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, here's the real question. Don't ask me about the variance in market price. You've already processed your cattle once. These are cattle we're going to ship as ball and calves off the cow a day of shipping. I said, you're going to run them through and process them again as we get close to preconditioning time, say 3 weeks, 4 weeks from delivery. I said, are you willing to go out and get your cattle up again and run them through the chute and put implants in them, or do what you need to do there, add ionophores to your minerals or your weaning ration or whatever you're doing? Are you willing to do that? And he's not. I said, okay, so then there's no discussion whether there's a premium or not in the marketplace today. You need to go ahead and verify those cattle and market them into an option where you at least have a shot at a premium for those cattle, not utilizing the technologies that we have for added weight gain. Then the decision you need to make is before next year's calf crop's even born. Then you start to analyze the data and decide what you want to do for 2026. Most people at this point in their program are not going to change their management practices based on the market. That may be a decision you want to make going forward, but it's probably not on this calf crop. Now, that is different for different people that run cattle differently. That that's different for a stalker guy that's going to have his hands on cattle more frequently. But there's no reason, don't take your cattle out of a program because the premiums are $8, $10, $12, and they used to be $15, $18, $20.
Yeah.
If you're not going to implement the technologies this year to capture that added weight gain, because at the end of the day, we're selling pounds of cattle for more money than any of us thought we ever would. Mm-hmm. And that weight is the difference. That's the real cost. The enrollment cost, the tag cost, the paperwork, that is not the cost of the cattle. The cost of the cattle is the difference in your management practice. So if you're not going to adapt your management practice, keep your cattle in the verification programs, whether that premium is the smallest we've seen in 10 years or the highest you've seen in 10 years. Don't let the marketing make the decision over your management. Let the marketing be a complement to your management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Okay, then it leads us to another question. I think the other big thing is to wean or not to wean, because relatively, Clint, that is something you can do with this year's calf crop. Make that decision now. Like you said,
that's correct.
The other programs, that's something you really started off, 1 or 2 years ago. And I agree. If you're going to do it, stay in it, be with it, do it right. But when we start talking VAC 34, VAC 45, some of that kind of stuff, that's a little bit different deal. That's something we could apply right here today if we wanted to. How, as you look coming out of that, and I'm sure, there's some differences. I saw some cattle that, gonna wean, not gonna wean. Prices were pretty dang close together. So, your thoughts on the weaning and the vaccinating?
Absolutely. And once again, just like we talked about on the programs, the difference between wean cattle and non-wean cattle is narrowed over prior years because the market's higher for all cattle. But what I would tell you there is a little bit the mentality, the thinking process of what we talk about when we talk about programs. The biggest question I'm going to ask, especially if you're not used to weaning cattle, are you good at weaning cattle and putting weight on? Because if you're making the decision to wean your calves or not wean your calves solely based on the difference you see in market price, you are making the wrong decision, especially when cattle are higher price like this per pound. Because your value in weaning, while there is a marketing advantage by reducing the risk on the buyer, every buyer wants to buy a wean calf over a balling calf. We just can't always do it. But your value is in the added weight gain that you're going to get. Most ranchers can put a pound of gain on in today's world for somewhere, I'm going to say, between $80 and $1.20. And it's narrower than that, but that's what I'm going to use because I don't think anybody'd argue with me on that. Mm-hmm. Well, if we're selling cattle from $350 to $450, depending on what it is, what kind of size calf you're weaning and all those other factors. But if we're selling cattle for that, you are way money ahead putting cheap gains on cattle and getting that return, even if the market was zero premium for wean cattle. But at the same strategy, I would tell you is if you're not good at weaning cattle, if struggle to keep cattle alive, if your labor is not set up to where you can handle that, or your facilities, or if you can't, over the course of, say, 45 to 60 days, put 90 or 100 pounds at a minimum on those cattle, then you probably should not be weaning cattle. Then you're, and I say that once again, don't let the marketing dictate the management. Think about the meat and potatoes, not the side dish. If you can put weight on those cattle while you're reducing the risk on the buyer and making them more appetizing in the market, you are way money ahead to wean your calves. But if you're not very good at it, if you struggle, you're going to eat potential death loss. If you have labor concerns or issues or facility concerns that don't allow you to do it correctly, if you don't have the forage base to be able to put those cheaper gains on cattle, then you should not be doing that. And I don't care if it's a $20 premium or a zero premium. I think that decision should be made from a management standpoint, not as much on a marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you kind of answered my next question, because my question I was going to ask you is, what is an expected weight gain per day on that? You'd answer that when you said, man, if you can't put about 90 to 100 pounds on these calves in a 45-day wean or window somewhere in theirs, then you might want to reconsider. And I think that was a question. It was a question for my own personal operation, really. I was asking that.
Right.
So I think that's a good way to look at that.
Yeah. And that's a pretty, if you think about it, that's a conservative about 2 pounds a day. Now, are you going to do that in the first 15 days? No, you're not. But the last 30 or 30 days of that weaning period, they should be doing much better than that. I have guys that raise excellent cattle and they're terrible at weaning them. Like, they should never choose that. Never. Because those cattle weigh, 45, 60 days later, those cattle weigh almost what they did when they weaned them. That is not, I don't care if there's a premium in the market or not, you lost money. And then there's guys that are excellent at it, that, it's not hard on the cattle. It's not hard on them. They're set up and they can do it. And some years we're going to have the forage base to do it. Some years we're not. That's going to play into it too. It's all different, but the general principle of the number one value add by weaning is increased weight gain at a lower cost and more profit in your pocket on a per head basis. And then the market is the enhancement to that. And I would stress that when you talk about program cattle, a lot of times that difference in market price can also be enhanced, because, if you're selling a set of natural calves, a wean set has less risk than a balling set, and instead of yearlings has less risk than a wean set. So, there's times that those premiums in the program cattle are enhanced even more, but the same principle stays in tune, that it should be a management decision more than a marketing one.
Mm-hmm. All right, Clint, let's take another break here. I want to talk one more thing about what did buyers pay for, what didn't they, and that this conversation is going to go down the road of talking about delivery times. And I think there's some other things I want to talk about with that. And then also, what, in your opinion, what was the biggest bang for your buck for folks as they look at this for future sales as well? I want to get into that when we come back here. This segment today brought to you by Rio Max, the tub that pays for itself.
We've done a few manure studies on the Rio Max product. On average, we're seeing 51% less undigested feed in cows' manure that have been on Rio Max. She's digesting her feed that much better and getting that much more protein and that much more energy out of her feed stuff.
Basically, that saved 2 months worth of forage that we either would have grazed or we would have fed.
We just noticed that number of cows per day per acre probably increased 20 to 30%.
So we put Rio Max on one set of cows and not the others. In the fall, when we wean those calves, we put the two sets of calves right together. There's a visual difference. I would say 35 or 40 pounds heavier.
I think we've increased our weaning weights at least 50 pounds.
Yeah, it's going to usually pay for itself.
Rio Max, the tub that pays for itself.
To learn more, call 888-386-0699 or online at riomax.net. All right, Clint, as we continue recapping here, Superior Livestock's Week in the Rockies sale, a little over 311,000 head. Am I correct in that number, Clint?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Yep.
That's right. We were well over 300,000. I don't know if that That may not be the biggest. I think we had one bigger than that in our history, but it's right there with it. That's a lot of cattle.
That is a lot of cattle moving through. That is for sure. Okay, as we were talking in the last segment, just wanting to flush out more of the just coming away from that. What did buyers pay for? What didn't they pay for? I want to talk a little on delivery date, and there's a couple ways we will talk about that. As you and I were talking, first of all, when we start getting into looking at the market report of that sale, and you can say, okay, well, I'm going to look at sales of these calves, 500 to 549 pound calves out of this particular state. Well, you could have a variety of delivery times, so that range that you're going to see there is going to be very large. So first of all, we have to understand that, don't we?
Yes, that's exactly right. Just good, very good point. When you listen to your local radio station or you see market recaps from a brick and mortar livestock market, you're seeing cattle that traded hands on X day. And not only did they sell that day, but they actually transferred ownership that day. Those cattle were in what we would call in the video world delivered on that day. But when you look at video markets, you can see a huge range of that. Perfect example. I sold cattle last week that I'm shipping tomorrow morning. And we sold cattle last week that are going to ship in January of 26. Should see the difference in that. So if you look at the day that they sold, there's a lot of static in those numbers. And I would encourage people, if you really want to dive into it, go to superiorlivestock.com and click on our market report tab. And you can pull up not only this sale, but we have other sales archive. And it breaks it down by region, weights, classifications of cattle. And there's ranges on there. When you click on those ranges, it will pull up the lots that make up those price ranges. And you can see that for yourself. You can see wean, non-wean, programs, non-programs. You can see delivery windows. You can get a feel for the quality of cattle, all those kind of things to help you understand and see that differently, because a 5-weight that sells in July and ships in September is not the same animal as the 5-weight that sold on the same day that ships in October or November or January.
Yeah, that's for sure. When we talk about delivery dates, another avenue I want to talk a little bit about, Clint, and I realize this conversation now is not really going to be something you can do now. I mean, maybe you can adjust a delivery date by 2 or 3 weeks with your calves, but you're really not going to, you have what you have, right now. So, but when we start looking at delivery times for folks, and maybe they're looking down the road next year or the year after that, what do you find? I mean, just in general, does delivery dates on cattle, is there any premium on certain times of the year that you have found? And of course, keep in mind, this is going to correlate to when folks calve. I get that. But I mean, what do you find in that?
Yeah, let's attack that twofold. Number one is most of what we're going to talk about is going to be irrelevant for you as a producer if you're not going to change your calving window. Mm-hmm. You can't affect the delivery window without affecting the calving window unless you're going to considerably deliver a very different animal, a very different sized animal. Okay, so if your management, once again, if your management should dictate what you're doing here, but if your management is, I need to be May June calvers for the country I live in, or I need to be January February calvers, or maybe I'm a fall calver, the value in the market will be superseded by the value in the management. If you're calving to fit your environment, your resources, and your labor, that is more value and profit in your pocket than the differences in the marketing. But to answer your question, which is what everybody asks, is, when is the best time to deliver cattle? Why is there a difference in it? It's all about the dead month. In general, and it's not exactly been that way here recently because the market's been on the move. And when I say the market, I'm talking on the fat market. Mm-hmm. But in general, if you look at, 19 out of 20 years, the April live cattle contract is the highest on record every single year. And so what that means is the cattle dying in the month of April, regardless of when it was you shipped them, what size they were, but when they can be fed and harvested during the month of April, give the biggest return to the buyer, your feeder, mm-hmm. from the packer on those cattle. So that animal that was a 5-weight at X month that died in April is worth more than the same exact animal that was shipped as a 5-weight in Y month that didn't die till August. Mm-hmm. And there's your difference. Now, the market's been changing and all contracts for months have been moving upwards in the fat cattle market, just like in the feeder cattle market. Still, if you're able to market at a time, here's simple capitalism 101 again. If you're shipping cattle when there's not as much supply, you're probably in a more favorable market. And we have because of the way that Mother Nature has and our industry has worked to where most of us, especially in the North, calve roughly at the same time. The vast majority of those cattle are shipping in October. Well, there's a reason that October is, has earned the nickname of Dead Calf Month.
Mm-hmm.
It's because there's so many of the cattle shipping, probably 60%, and in the North, it's probably more like 75% of cattle shipped from the very end of September to the very 1st of November, the month of October, And so if you're looking to add value from a pure delivery window, if you can avoid that will typically enhance some value there. But now I'm going to warn you, don't do that because of marketing, do that because of management. Because if you have to calve at a different season and it doesn't work into your management practices, whatever premium you think you're going to pick up in the marketing is not going to supersede your management practices. Making your cows work for you and calve at a time you need and match the forage that you have and your labor. We always got to consider labor in that, but those things supersede, the difference in a 5-weight shipping in October versus the difference in 5-weight shipping in September.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, one more thing is we're talking about what did buyers pay for, what didn't they? And I guess under that heading would be your thoughts, the biggest bang for your buck.
I don't know that I would have said this because I was watching the value of we're going to talk about feeders. A lot of guys call yearlings, and just kind of a little nuance between what the two mean. A yearling is typically an animal that is a year old or older, and it's typically not been pushed as much. A feeder sometimes is cattle that have been put up in a dry lot and fed a little heavier. But regardless, we're talking about cattle that weigh 750 to 1,000 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
We'll catch almost all of them. Those animals early on, I mean, we did it this week. We set some records for the price of those. But if you look at the value of that and consider the fact that the time for an 8-weight to get to 1,500 pounds or 1,600 pounds and be killed is narrower. So the risk factor in the long term is narrower versus looking at a 5-weight that needs to put 1,000 pounds on. I'm going to tell you, I think there's some real value in the feeders and the yearlings, even though they're all-time highs. I mean, everybody's a little different in that, but I got to thinking, as we processed through, I thought Tuesday when we sold the majority of our feeders, that was the most incredible market I've ever seen. And then we sold some calves later in the week. And I thought, well, all of a sudden, some of them feeders look pretty reasonable, But I'll tell you what, that this is probably not what you were thinking. I'll tell you what, in my opinion, is the most valuable animal in the beef industry as we sit here today at the middle of July, 2025. And this is not uncommon for when the market makes the move. But as we move up, these are always the most valuable animals in the short term. A young bred female, and whether you're talking a bred heifer, a 2 or 3 or 4, or maybe even a 5-year-old bred cow, I still think they are incredibly undervalued in this market. If we're selling $23, $24, $25, $2,600 calves, balling, weaned, maybe, a yearling even, we're selling that kind of value. And we're consistently seeing, and have been for 18 to 24 months, seeing way up cows, way up, slaughter cull cow prices in the $1.20, $1.40, $1.60 range. It's not very often in this business that you could buy a bred animal. And in essence, even if you didn't breed her back, if you weaned the calf off and sold her as a railer cow, that you would be able to recapture your initial purchase price within 1 year. That seldom happens in our business. And right now, I think the bred stock are the most undervalued animals out there. It's still a buyer's market when it comes to that. We're starting to see several of them show up, and I've seen some unbelievable prices. I've seen $4,500, $5,000 on some really top of the line young bred ones, but it's not consistent. I've seen some really high quality cattle get offered for $3,200, $3,500 and not have a buyer on them. I mean, I just think in the short term, that is the most valuable animal that we see out there. And I also know from experience that will only last for a little bit.
Yeah.
When we turn this deal and we really start replenishing, the number one animal, in my opinion, the number one category for in the cattle industry that's going to have the biggest spike in value is going to move to them bred animals. And I'm going to say open replacement heifers, but we're really talking about the bred animals because you're ahead a whole season with a calf in its belly already.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Clint, let's take another break. When we come back, folks, we're going to get a little bit more into some of the prices. Now, we're not going to get real detailed, but a little bit, and also get into the conversation of, are we seeing heifers as far back as they were, or are they starting to creep up a little bit as somewhat of an indicator that where this market's going to be headed in the future? We'll get into that when we come back here on the program. This segment today brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
All right, Clint, I do want to kind of dive a little bit into maybe more of the specifics on some of these prices. As you and I were talking there at break, it's kind of hard to do that because, and folks, we're not going to get just really hardcore into some of the prices. I think we can talk a little bit of ranges here today, but as Clint will tell you here in a bit, the website does a good job of going through that stuff and giving and breaking that out for you. But Clint, when we start through that, of course, as with your guys' sales, we've got several different regions in there that break it up. A lot of times it's kind of similar type cattle that sell in that. Sure. But when we start up and we'll just kind of maybe pick a weight here as we go through these, and at the same time we'll talk a little on the heifer conversation that I want to get into as well. But let's just take steers. When we look into region 1, which would include Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, California, and Washington, I'm going to take some cattle out of Idaho there. It looked like we had a range anywhere from 362 to 398 on 550 to 6-weight calves. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that's important for the viewers, the listeners to understand that there's going to be a lot of static in our reports because, like we mentioned in the earlier segment, these cattle are selling on during this week, but they're not necessarily changing ownership at that time. So there is a wide variance there. Plus, there's not only delivery windows, but there's programs and weaning and non-weaning and just overall quality and reputation that play into it too. But you're right. Like the region 1 cattle in that 550 to 6-weight for steers is, 362 to as high as 412. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it varies a little bit on what you're looking at, but I would encourage you to go and review those for yourself and dial into what you're actually looking for. So if you're a rancher in Wyoming, you can go to region 2 and pull those cattle up in a weight range that you want to do. And you can see all of the cattle that make up that range. So when we spit out a range of $30 or $40 difference, there's a lot of static in that number, but you can go and review that yourself. But yeah, those cattle, they're going to really ring a bell for that kind of deal, but it lets you kind of tailor that to your interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I look down through region 2, that same weight size of cattle, they ranged anywhere from about 355 to 431. So it looks like some cattle, or actually 441 out of North Dakota and South Dakota was a high end on some of that cattle. But again, delivery dates, program type situations that might be in there, looking at the weaned and not weaned, it kind of gives you some idea. Region 3 into Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Louisiana, and Arkansas, probably pulling some cattle out of Texas and Oklahoma. Pricing looks like anywhere from about 335 to 442 on that price. Anything stand out in region 3, Clint, that you saw?
Yeah, same scenario there, and understand region 3 is a market that's going to make up predominantly the Southwest and part of the Southeast, including Louisiana and Arkansas. But so you're going to deal with some cattle that look like a northern calf from Nebraska, and you're going to deal with some cattle that are going to be carrying, half-blood Bramer in them, crossbred cattle that are carrying a lot more year and may not be program eligible for some of the premium stuff, but have an advantage on, feeding through the summer. And probably region 3 more than any other area is going to have some of the widest ranges and delivery windows, because you have, when you just the state of Texas, let alone the other states, you start talking about that, you have a climate similar to Colorado in the Panhandle and a climate similar to Florida along the coastline. So, I mean, you're dealing with a vast, wide array of cattle that are shipping from next week all the way till, like I said, the end of the year. And that's where part of that static's going to come up. So you have to understand that when you see those numbers. But, it's just higher quality cattle with better management and reputation, higher genetics are still going to drive the boat. But all cattle, the benefit of all producers, all cattle are bringing record highs right now.
Yeah. We look down into Region 4, it looks like Kansas had a pretty good set of calves that went through there about in any different class weights, 550 to 6 weight steer calves, 370 to 434, a little bunch out of Missouri at 420. So, good prices there for cattle there. But with that in mind, Clint, the question I have now is, okay, and that's something I always ask you is, okay, where are the heifers at? What's going on with our heifers? Because that's going to be one of our indicators of what this market's going to do in the next 2 to 3 years out.
That's right. And I would tell you, just like we've talked for the last couple of years, in general, I mean, we're still selling heifers at feeder value. There's little pressure for replacement value on the heifers. And I'm saying that this week in the middle of July in 2025. But I will also tell you that if you know what you're looking for, there's indications that we are turning that boat around. And I'll tell you, a lot of your listeners know I have a past in Red Angus, and so it's going to sound biased when I say this, but I don't mean it this way. And if you're dialed into the market on the video sales, you're going to see this not only on ours, but on some of the competitors. But we're starting to consistently see the red replacement value heifers bring steer price or higher.
Okay.
That's a small indicator that because they are limited in supply, they are usually the first ones to make that jump. And when you start seeing that, you're starting to see the indication that there is optimism about retaining some replacements and marketing replacements too, specifically marketing replacements. I'm not the only person that believes that the best value in the industry is of a young bred animal. So there's a lot of guys that are going to try to be ahead of this and buy some of these heifers and make young bred animals to be selling a year from now. You're still seeing, I would tell you that in general, heifers are going to sell from $15 to $30 back. And that's the fair market. And that's what I would tell you that most of them are going to be. And that's, if as a rancher, if you're looking at it, that's probably going to be your value. I know that's a wide range, but that's dependent a little bit on size, of course, and values there. And are you offering 90% of your heifers, or are you taking, 35% off and then offering the balance? That's a different prospect, because you've in essence what we call pop those heifers for yourself. And you should do that. If you're keeping replacements, you should keep the better ones that fit your environment and your management. And a heifer is always an inferior feeder animal as compared to the exact same genetic and managed steer, right? I mean, some guys' heifers are worth more than other guys' steers, and that's harsh to say, but that's the reality. Some people's cattle is different than others, but in your own herd, your heifer, your very best heifer, is an inadequate feeder animal as compared to your steers, because they convert less, they cost more per gain, and they might grade as well when you hang the carcass, but the carcass won't weigh what their steer mates do. So they're just not, it's a V6 compared to a V8 engine. That's the difference, and that's why that value, when you don't have replacement pressure on them, that's why that value's there. But I think you're starting to see some pressure for those. I can't say that from the numbers I was seeing, and I don't have all of that in front of me, but from the numbers I'm seeing, I don't know that there's been a drastic push to start retaining heifers. I'm not seeing guys keeping, 40% more heifers than what they were a year ago by any means, but you're starting to see a little softening of that. And I think the indicators are there that as we move into the fall, that you really might start to see it now. A little more aptitude. And let's be fair, what else have we done in the industry from a big picture? Most producers have had 2 amazing years of profitability. I mean, most ranchers have received over the last 2 years probably the biggest paychecks returns for their cattle that they've ever seen in their lifetime, generational lifetimes. So, I mean, there's our bottom lines, our profit loss sheets are looking a lot better, and a lot of guys are ready to reinvest, especially with the added moisture that we're having in those areas. And there's some parts of the country that had severe reductions. And the biggest thing you're going to see is, I think, some of those regions where we had, from an outside factor, had a pressure on cattle, like I think about fire loss and things like that. Those areas are going to see more pressure than some of the others that have been more stable. But I think you're starting to see that turn, and I think a lot of people are understanding that. And some folks, it may be a risk appetite. You know, do I want to give $2,600 for a bald calf, or do I want to buy a $3,500 bred heifer?
Yeah.
What's the least risky there?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Clint, we'll take another break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about just maybe some hints and some advice you could offer folks when it comes to if they may be interested in listing cattle through video auctions or even the country page options. A lot of different variations of that. Superior's got their country page. Other sites have theirs as well that do that to more of a static eBay type of a concept of selling. And I want to talk about that when we come back here on the program. This segment today brought to you by Tank Toad, your remote water monitoring system, all from the convenience of your phone. It's what we've been using here in our ranch operations for several years. We can keep a track of our cistern tank to know how water is coming in and out, or if there's a fast decrease of water, maybe got to float off somewhere. And in this time of the year, when we get into this hot summer months, the last thing we need is a water problem going on. Get ahead of it before it becomes a problem by using your remote water monitoring system with Tank Toad. For more information, give them a call. Meadowlark Solutions is the name, 801-252-6135, or you can go to their website at tanktoad.com.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
All right, Clint, as we wrap up our conversation here today, recapping the results and just the conversation, your thoughts and ideas as we come out of the Week of the Rockies sale for Superior Livestock, a little over 311,000 head that sold in that sale. And as we wrap up our conversation here today, I think there's some guys saying, okay, you know, these prices are good. I want to do something. Maybe I've never done anything before on a video sale or on a listing, internet listing of that sort of thing. So the question I had written down as I was preparing for our conversation here today, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your country page, because that's kind of a something that folks, if they've never really done this before, that's a pretty easy way to do it. But if people are going to do that, and not only just country page, but even if they're going to video sale, just some hints and some guides that would help them in that process.
Sure. Once again, I would direct you to go to superiorlivestock.com. There's a wealth of knowledge on that website where you can find everything from schedules to auction market reports to all kinds of information, and you can locate the rep in your area that you'd like to reach out and talk to. But we do offer the company. I mean, everybody knows us for our big auctions that we have. We have an auction every other Thursday, and during the summer we have these big auctions that last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. And that's the ones that draw the most attention, of course. But we also have the country page, which is an online platform. Everything works just the same as the auction principle, except there's an asking price that the seller and their rep come up with and offer on the page. And then that's put out in front of the buyer base, and buyers can then bid on those cattle, and market those cattle in a 24/7 rather than be constricted with a deadline for this auction or that auction or timing wise. But the catalogs are the same. The online write-ups are the same. There's program cattle, there's wean cattle, there's balling cattle, there's every classification that you find they're there. The videos, are still there. Everything's there. The only thing that's missing is the competitive nature of the live auction market. So some sellers like it because it's slower pace. Some buyers like it because it's slower pace. I'm a big believer in the live auction process to establish what the real market is. True price discovery, I think, comes from competitive bidding. But during markets like this, when things are high, the country page, of course, feeds off of that. Just like, for those that sell their cattle in the country, those country buyers, they price their cattle off of what we're selling them for on the videos. When we sell 300,000 head, we've set the market, kind of a deal. But it gives a flexibility there for a seller, especially if you want to move at a slower pace. And, I've had some folks that have listed cattle on the country page, and then they roll them into an auction at deadline time if we haven't got them traded. There's a lot of flexibility there, and that's what Superior wants to offer our customer base, is the ability to sell cattle the way you want to sell them, when you want to sell them, and still get exposure to the entire buyer base. But we do have a big auction coming up. Our next big one is July 28th through the 1st, the Video Royale out in Winnemucca. That deadline was actually the 11th. We're sitting here talking at the first part of the week, middle of July here. So the deadline time for that one's over. But the next big sale we have is our Bighorn Classic, which is in Sheridan, Wyoming, August 18th through the 22nd, and that catalog deadline is the 1st. So you've got till the 1st of August to reach out to your rep and start to make plans to be able to lock that spot in. And like we said, the country page is available 24/7. So, if you want to move in between rather than waiting, or, if you miss the deadline and like to get your cattle moved faster, or whatever you'd like to do, there's flexibility there for you as a seller.
Yeah. Clint, real quick, and this is something, we see them on every sale, but there's going to be some guys that say, well, I don't do that because I don't have enough to put together a whole pot of steers or a whole pot of heifers. And so they just have never messed with it, and that's fine. There's a lot of sale barns that are reps for you guys, or other video or internet type sites. So that's fine. One way or the other, there's a way to sell them. But split loads, you can do that through video sales, yours or anybody's, or country page or internet sites.
Yeah, that's correct. We sell split loads of cattle all the time, and it can vary on what that split load is. A split load in our terms, that means a load of cattle, one truck load of cattle that is a mixture of steers and heifers. That's what a split load means, two sexes on the same truck. But the split loads can vary as to what they are, but we sell them a lot of times. They can be a little more disadvantaged in the marketplace, just simply because a split load of cattle requires more management from a buyer. They've got, instead of one full load of steers, because most feed yards, pen spaces are designed in load lots. So, those cattle are typically going to be split, steers and heifers, but there's flexibility for the sellers there too.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there is. All right, Clint. Well, appreciate the recap here. Definitely a time in the market for folks that's unprecedented, and we appreciate you taking the time to give us a little bit of a recap on that. Just a quick final comment from you.
You're most welcome. I'm glad to be a part and be able to visit on the show. Reach out to us at superiorlivestock.com. We'd love to work with you and get a chance to market your cattle and offer any advice we could.
All right. Appreciate it, Clint. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
You bet. Clint Berry, our guest here today on the program. He is out of San Angelo, Texas, has been a Superior rep for several years. Appreciate visiting with him on this. If you are a regular listener to the Working Ranch Radio Show, you know that we do bring him on from time to time to kind of get a gauge on the market as well as where it's going, and hopefully, going to continue to stay there as it moves forward. Stay with us. I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. What is the future of our county and state fairs across the country? That will be the subject of our program next week. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.